Hello everyone, and welcome to Grade 12 Accounting. The topic that we're going to cover today is fixed assets, asset disposal, and audit reports. This is going to involve covering some of your Grade 11 work to remember the various steps involved in disposing fixed assets, as well as some aspects of internal control and learning how to read, analyze, and discuss an audit report. So I'm going to start off just by showing you some of the steps that are necessary to do asset disposal, which you should remember from Grade 11 Accounting. Remember that when you are disposing of non-current assets, there are always 5 steps that need to be followed. Let's review what those 5 steps are. First of all, you need to calculate and record the depreciation on the fixed asset that is being disposed of. When we say disposed of, we mean that the asset has been sold, or that the asset has been taken out by the owner, or that the asset has been donated. In other words, any time your fixed asset leaves your business, that is going to involve the use of asset disposal. So let's look at the first step. We are going to need to calculate and record the depreciation on the asset that has been sold or otherwise disposed of. Please note that this does not apply if the asset was sold at the beginning of the year. The reason for that is that if you sell the asset at the beginning of the year, you would already know what its accumulated depreciation is, since depreciation is calculated at the end of every financial year. In this example, though, we are selling the asset halfway through or somewhere in the middle of the financial year. This is going to mean that we need to calculate depreciation from the start of the financial year up to and including the date of sale. Let's review how to do this. You should remember that there are 2 methods of calculating depreciation. First of all, there is the fixed installment method, and secondly, there is the diminished balance method. The 2 methods are actually quite similar, and you'll just need to know the formula for how to calculate depreciation. So when we're dealing with the fixed installment method, you will take the cost price of the asset, you will multiply by the depreciation rate over 100, because remember, depreciation is always given as a percentage, and you'll multiply by the number of months and divide by 12. When I say number of months, I mean the number of months from the beginning of the financial year up to the day on which the asset was disposed of. If we are doing the diminished balance method, on the other hand, you need to remember that we are not going to work with the cost price of the asset. Instead, we are going to work with the carrying value. In other words, what the asset was worth less its accumulated depreciation on the date of the sale. So what we will do is we will take the cost price minus the accumulated depreciation. That's going to give us the carrying value. And then we'll proceed as normal, multiply by the rate of depreciation and divide by 100. And once again, multiply by the number of months that we have kept the asset for and divide by 12. Once again, N is going to equal the number of months from the start of the financial year up to the date of the sale. Once you have calculated depreciation in this way, you will need to make the entry in your ledger accounts. And that simply involves debiting depreciation and crediting accumulated depreciation. And remember, only equipment and vehicles are depreciated. We assume for grade 12 purposes that land and buildings are not depreciated because they gain in value, they normally appreciate. As a result, you will have to credit the account for the accumulated depreciation either on vehicles or on equipment, depending which of these is applicable. We'll see in a few minutes how to do that. The second step in asset disposal is that we will need to transfer the cost price of the asset that we have sold to the asset disposal account. If you look at the note here, it says transfer the cost price of the asset sold to the asset disposal account. And to do that, you are going to have to debit the asset disposal account, and you're going to have to credit the asset account. After doing that, the third step is that the total accumulated depreciation on that sold asset must be transferred to the asset disposal account as well. When I say total accumulated depreciation, I mean every single piece of depreciation that belongs to that asset that has been sold. In other words, it's the accumulated depreciation at the beginning of the year on that asset only. Not on other assets, but only on the one that you are disposing of. And then you will have to add to that the depreciation that has been calculated in step 1. That will give you your total accumulated depreciation on that sold asset on and including the date of the sale. Once we have that number, we transfer it to the asset disposal account by debiting accumulated depreciation and crediting asset disposal. We'll see how that works in a minute. Step 4 is that we will need to record the selling price on the disposal of the asset. Now, we could sell this asset for cash, we could sell it on credit, or we could trade it in. Which of these three you do is going to determine what you write in your asset disposal account. So let's take a look at the three possibilities. First of all, we could sell the asset for cash. Remember, every time you sell something for cash, your bank account is going to increase. That means we are going to have to debit bank. At the same time, we will credit the asset disposal account with the selling price. In other words, the amount of money that we received on selling the asset. Of course, instead of selling the vehicle for cash, we could sell it on credit. If we sell it on credit, nothing is happening to bank. Instead, we have a debtor, and that debtor now owes us money. That means we are going to have to debit debtors control. In the same way, we will credit the asset disposal account, but our details will be different. We will write debtors control instead of bank. Thirdly, we could trade the vehicle in, or we could trade the piece of equipment in. If that happens, instead of debiting bank or debtors control, we will debit creditors control. And then, as per usual, we will credit the asset disposal account. So far, you've got 3 entries in your asset disposal account. Let's take a look at how it looks. On the debit side, you are going to have the cost price of your asset, which is this. On the credit side, you are going to have your accumulated depreciation, and then you're going to have either your bank account, or debtors control, or creditors control. You can see though here on my ledger account, there are still 2 entries that need to be made, and those are going to correspond to step 4 and step 5. In step 5, we are going to determine whether there is a profit or a loss on the disposal of the asset. How to do that is quite easy. What you're going to do is you're going to look at your selling price of the asset. In other words, you are going to look at this number here that you filled in on the credit side of your asset disposal account. If this number is more than what the asset is worth on the day of your sale, then you have made a profit. If it is less, then you have made a loss. So to check that, what you will do is you will take the cost price of your asset, which is this number here, and subtract the accumulated depreciation on your asset, which is this number here. That answer you will then compare to the number that I've circled here, and you'll determine whether you've made a profit or whether you have made a loss. Let me just put in some numbers here as a simple example. Let's say that the cost price of the asset was 4,000 Rand, and the accumulated depreciation was 1,000 Rand, but we have sold it for 2,000 Rand. 2,000 Rand is the selling price, 4,000 Rand is the cost price, and 1,000 Rand is the accumulated depreciation. I would like to know whether we have made a profit or a loss on the sale. The way to work that out is very easy. On the day of the sale, the carrying value of this asset is equal to the 4,000 Rand that it originally cost me, less the 1,000 Rand of accumulated depreciation that has been worked out onto the date of the sale. That gives me an answer of 3,000 Rand. We compare that 3,000 to the 2,000 that we got for the asset, whether we've sold it for cash, on credit, or traded it in. You should be able to see that we've got 2,000 Rand for an asset that is actually worth 3,000 Rand on the day of the sale. Clearly then, we have made a loss of 1,000 Rand on the sale because we have sold something worth 3,000 Rand for only 2,000 Rand. What we would then do is we would include the 1,000 Rand on the very next line, which is then referred to as loss on sale of asset. And if you add the two sides up, please ignore this for now. If you add the two sides up, you will see that both sides come to 4,000 Rand. So, if we look back at our rule, we will see that in this example, the selling price was less than the carrying value. In other words, this 3,000 Rand that we calculated as the carrying value was less than the 2,000 Rand that we received for the asset. That therefore means that we have made a loss, and you can see from the notes over here that we are going to credit the asset disposal account and debit loss on sale of asset. That's exactly what we've done here. We have credited the asset disposal account with 1,000 Rand, and that will be transferred to the opposite side of the ledger in the loss on sale of asset ledger account on the debit side. Okay, let's change the example around and pretend that we've made a profit instead of a loss. Let me change the numbers so that you can see how that would work. Suppose now that we had started with a fixed asset whose cost price was 4,000 Rand and whose accumulated depreciation on the date of the sale was 1,000 Rand. That's exactly the same example as I had previously. Now though, suppose that instead of selling it for 2,000 Rand, we sell it for 5,000 Rand. You should be able to see that the carrying value of the asset is still 3,000 Rand because its original cost price was 4,000 and its accumulated depreciation was 1,000. If we subtract the accumulated depreciation from the cost price, we say 4,000 minus 1,000, and that gives us a carrying value of 3,000 Rand. In this example, though, we have received 5,000 Rand for the asset. In other words, we have made a profit of 2,000 Rand because 5,000 minus the carrying value of 3,000 is 2,000 Rand. Now, we won't make this entry on the debit side, on the credit side for loss on sale of asset. Instead, we will make it on the debit side as the profit on the sale of asset. So we will write the 2,000 Rand in here. Can you see that if we add the two sides together, on both sides we get 6,000 Rand. In other words, if you look at your rule, you will see that when the selling price is greater than the carrying value, in other words, our 5,000 is greater than the carrying value of 3,000, we have made a profit on the sale of the asset. What will then happen is we will debit the asset disposal account or credit the profit on sale of assets account. Often in a question, the question will leave out one of the four numbers in the asset disposal account. So sometimes the question will not require you to work out the profit on the sale or the loss on the sale. Sometimes the question will give you the profit on the sale or the loss of the sale. Then you just fill it in on the correct side and you balance the asset disposal account in order to determine which of the missing numbers you need to calculate. So sometimes they might give you the cost price and the profit and the accumulated depreciation. You would then simply balance the asset disposal account to work out our missing number, which in this example would be the selling price. Okay, so that is how you would do asset disposal. Those are your 5 steps. Once you've done that, you need to just balance all your ledger accounts, and please remember that you would usually need to calculate depreciation on the remainder of the fixed assets at the end of the year. Usually, a question gives you three types of assets. You usually get an asset that has been sold, which will be transferred into the asset disposal account. You also get an asset that has been bought, which you'd have to calculate depreciation on. And you usually have to calculate depreciation on the remainder of your fixed assets after you have sold them all. Let's look at an example of how asset disposal would work. The question says that you have been provided with information in respect of Bloemfontein Hardware for the year ended 29 February 2008. This business is owned by Mike Moore and Millie Miles. What you are required to do is, number one, to prepare the asset disposal account for office equipment or computers stolen on the 30th of June 2007. And the question says, see information point 1 below. So before we look at 1.2, let's see if we can do that already. Here's the information. Information point 1 says, office equipment and disposals. Office equipment includes the office computers. So that's correct, because you'll remember that anything that is used in the business to generate profit would be an asset, and office equipment would refer to all machines, all electronic equipment, furniture, desks, things like that. So an office computer would correctly be included in office equipment. The question tells us that 6 of the office computers were stolen on the 30th of June 2007. So when something is stolen, even though it hasn't been sold, you would need to draw up an asset disposal account. It also tells us that the 6 computers were originally bought at a cost price of 13,200 Rand each. So there are 6 computers, each costing 13,200 Rand, that have now been stolen. Then there's further information telling us that the insurance company, Ace Insurers, only paid out 5,000 Rand for each computer. It also says that the computers were replaced at a higher price on the 31st of August 2007. So in other words, the business has used the insurance money that it received and put in some extra money to buy some new computers on the 31st of August 2007. Furthermore, there's some information here on the fixed asset note. You should again remember the fixed asset note from grade 11. In the fixed asset note, we can see that we had a carrying value of 630,000 in office equipment at the beginning of the year. It also gives us our cost and our accumulated depreciation. And then the important one that we're going to look at is the disposals at carrying value of computers, which in this example was 63,360 Rand. So on the day that we disposed of the computers, the carrying value of them was 63,360. Let's see how this information can help us to draw up the asset disposal account. If we go to our answer sheet, we can see that the ledger has been left completely blank for us, and we are going to need to follow these 5 steps to try to work out what is happening in our asset disposal account. Let's look back at the steps and see what we can do. Step 1 is going to involve calculating and recording the depreciation on the asset that has been sold. Now, the second point here says that this does not apply if the asset was sold at the beginning of the year. In this example, the asset was not sold or disposed of at the beginning of the year because it was sold halfway through the year. That is to say, it was disposed of on the 30th of June 2007. Since our financial year ended on the 29th of February 2008, we can see that this was halfway through the year. There were certain months during the year that we'd have to calculate depreciation on. However, this question does not give us any information about what the depreciation rate is. Because the depreciation rate was not given to us, it's not going to be possible for us to calculate depreciation on those computers up to the date of sale. You will see that nowhere in the information do they give us that the rate was 10% per year or 15% per year or something like that. So that's going to mean that we're going to have to use some other method to calculate the depreciation. So when you see something like that in a question, perhaps it's a good idea to skip the first step and to see whether the second, third, fourth, and fifth steps of the asset disposal account would perhaps be of use to us. Let's review what the second step is. The second step is that we need to transfer the cost price of the asset that was sold or stolen to the asset disposal account. Here's something that we can do. So let's look back at the information. Can you see that the question says in information point 1 that office equipment includes 6 office computers that were stolen on the 30th of June 2007. So this 6 is an important number because it says that the 6 computers were originally bought at a cost price of 13,200 Rand each. Can you see that we have now been given the cost price of the computers that were stolen? 6 computers, each costing 13,200 Rand. So we can already complete the asset disposal account with the second step. What we're going to want to do is we are going to want to include the cost price of the computers that were stolen. Since they were computers, we should write on the debit side of this asset what they were, and since they were computers, they were equipment. Now we need to transfer the cost price in here. To do that, we need to remember that there were 6 computers, each costing 13,200 Rand. So the calculation is simply going to be 6 computers multiplied by 13,200 Rand, and that will give us a cost price of 79,200 Rand. So those 6 computers altogether cost 79,200 Rand. That was the cost price of the equipment that was stolen from us, and I'm going to write it in here. 79,200 Rand. That was the first step. Let's now look at step number 3, because remember we skipped step number 1 because we didn't have a depreciation rate, and so we were not able to do that. Step 3 says that we should transfer the total accumulated depreciation on this asset to the asset disposal account. Now it might seem that we can't do that because we haven't been given the depreciation rate. But there is another important piece of information that has been given to us in this question that will help us do exactly this. Can you guess what it is? Let's have a look back at the question. The information in the question gives us a full and complete fixed asset note. Here it is. Our fixed asset note shows us what we disposed of, and it tells us the carrying value of our disposals. So here's another important formula that you should remember from last year. If you ever want to have the carrying value, you should remember that it's equal to the cost price minus the accumulated depreciation. So the carrying value of the assets that we've sold is 63,360 Rand. And that actually equals the cost price minus the accumulated depreciation. Let's write that as a formula. Carrying value is equal to the cost price minus the accumulated depreciation, which means that this 63,360 is equal to our cost price minus the accumulated depreciation. But we've just calculated our cost price. Remember, our cost price was 79,200 Rand, which we got by multiplying the 6 computers that were sold by the cost price of each computer. So what that means is that we have the cost price, and it's 79,200 Rand. What we want to calculate is the total accumulated depreciation on the date of the sale. And can you see that we now have an equation that allows us to calculate it? So we can say that if 63,360 is equal to 79,200 minus our accumulated depreciation, if you solve this equation, you get the accumulated depreciation equal to 79,200 minus 63360. All I've done is I've taken the accumulated depreciation to the left-hand side of the equation, so it becomes positive, and I've taken the 63360 to the right-hand side of the equation, so it becomes negative. Using this, we'll be able to work out the accumulated depreciation on the date of the sale that is supposed to be put in here. So let me write so long that it's accumulated depreciation on equipment. Remember that your examiner will expect you to write this out in full. I know it's sometimes a hassle, but it's very important because you will lose marks if you don't write accumulated depreciation on equipment or on vehicles out in full. Even if you have to squeeze it in, it doesn't matter, but do not abbreviate. You're not allowed to abbreviate in ledger accounts unless you're writing one of the abbreviations for the journals like CJ, CPJ, DJ, DAJ, or GJ. Okay, so I've written now my accumulated depreciation on equipment on the credit side of the asset disposal account, and here is the calculation to work it out. I'm going to say 79,200, which is still in my calculator, and I'm going to subtract from that 63360, and that will give me the accumulated depreciation on the date of the sale as 15840. 15840 was the answer, so I will put it in here. 15840. So we've completed the third step in our asset disposal. The fourth step is the step that involves recording the selling price. Now, what's actually happened here is we need to record the sale or the disposal of the asset. And it says that we should use the selling price or the price obtained for the asset. Now, remember in this example, we did not actually sell the asset. The asset was stolen. But we did get some money for the asset. So let's have a look at what the question tells us. Here it tells us, on the note on office equipment, it says that the insurance company paid out 5,000 Rand for each computer. In other words, we received that money. It came in. We got 5,000 Rand for each computer that was stolen. So we have received a total of 5,000 Rand per computer, so it will be 5,000 times 6. The total amount of money that we have received is going to be 5,000 Rand per computer times 6 computers. That comes to 30,000 Rand. So if the insurance has paid that 30,000 Rand out, what is going to have to happen is that that money must be recorded in our bank account on the debit side. It's almost the same as selling the vehicle or the piece of equipment for cash, except now there hasn't been a buyer that paid it out, it's been an insurance payout that you've received. So what you will do is you'll go back to the asset disposal account, and remember the next step involves putting the selling price of the asset on the credit side. So we can assume that we sold it for 30,000 Rand. Even though we didn't really sell it, it works out exactly the same way. It's as if we sold the asset for 30,000 Rand. And we would have to write in here the word bank, because that is the money that we received for the asset. Now we should be able to see that the two sides don't balance. The debit side is 79,200. The credit side is about 45,000 and something. So what we need to do is calculate whether we have made a profit or whether we have made a loss on the sale of these assets. Of course, it's not a sale once again, but you can treat it as if it were a sale to work out what loss you have made. So, the easiest way of doing this is not really to worry about calculating the carrying value and working it out. The easiest way is just to balance this account out and determining whether you've made a profit or a loss. So when balancing the general ledger, you should all know how to do that. What would happen is we would identify what the biggest side is. Can you see that 79,000 on the debit side is definitely bigger than these two credits? That's about 45,000. So what we would do is we'd identify this bigger side, which is 79,200, and we would write the total at the bottom. So there's 79,200 Rand. Now, to balance the ledger account, we look at the smaller side, and we need to add something here that makes the two sides equal. That will, of course, be the balance in our account. So to do that, we will take our 79,200, we will subtract 30,000, we will subtract 15,840 to get the number that balances the two sides out, and that is 33360. So let's write it in there, 33360. Now the two sides are equal, but we have to determine what to write here in the details column. Remember, in the note that you have had previously, the final step was to work out whether you've made a profit or a loss on the sale or the disposal of the asset. Let's look at it again. If the number appears on the debit side of asset disposal, then it is a profit. If it appears on the credit side of asset disposal, then it is a loss. So let's look back at our example. In our example, it appears on the credit side of the asset disposal account. So what we should actually write here is loss. And we shouldn't say loss on sale of asset because we haven't actually sold the asset. Here's where the difference comes in. We should write something like loss due to theft. So our loss due to the theft of asset has come to 33360. It's very, very important for you to know the 5 steps necessary to prepare the asset disposal account, because remember I said previously that one of those steps will always be left out and you'll have to calculate the missing number in the ledger account. In this example, we had to calculate the missing number of 33360, which was our loss due to the theft of the asset. If you can do that, that's 12 marks already in the bag. Okay, let's look at the next question in this example. We're now dealing with internal control on assets. So let's look at 1.2. One of the office employees, Divulge, knows that the insurance policy only covers theft if there's evidence of forced entry. In other words, if it's obvious that somebody has broken into the building and stolen something. She also knows that Mike, in other words, that's one of the owners of the business, broke the security gate of the office to make the incident look like forced entry. So what this means is that when the computers were stolen, there was no sign of somebody breaking in. Perhaps somebody forgot to lock the office, or perhaps somebody left the door open, or something like that happened, so that people came in, stole the computers and left without damaging the door or damaging the window or breaking a lock or something of that nature. Now, the insurance policy would only pay out if there were signs of the forced entry, and this employee has discovered that her boss has broken the security gate of the office to make sure that it looks like forced entry. She doesn't know whether Millie knows about this. Millie, you'll remember, is the other partner in this business. Remember, the business is owned by Mike Moore and Millie Miles. So the question for 3 marks is, what advice would you give Di? And you have to explain 1 point for 3 marks. When you're answering a question like this, what's very important to do is to provide a good and ethical answer. It surely would not be ethical just to be quiet and to not say anything, because what that's going to mean is that the insurance company has paid out when in fact it shouldn't have paid out. So it's almost like stealing money from the insurance company. So some possible advice to Divulge would perhaps be that she should first speak to the other partner and tell her what she knows. If your partner is doing something unethical, you in a partnership would certainly want to know about it. And if you are an employee, you must make sure that you behave ethically whenever possible. So it would be ethical for her to speak to Millie and to tell her what she knows. That would be an example of some advice. She should perhaps also not lay the insurance claim. Because it could be regarded as fraud to break into your own building so that it looks as if the building has been broken into by somebody else, just to make sure that the insurance pays out. There could be penalties for it, there could be fines for it, and it should really not be good practice to lay an insurance claim in a situation like this. A third possibility, or a third important point, is that Mike is being dishonest in this example because he's actually lying to the insurance agency by pretending that the building was broken into. Obviously, it would be bad for Millie to have a partner that is dishonest because Mike could be dishonest towards her. So it would be good for Di to tell Millie about this incident to make sure that she is aware that her partner has done something dishonest. You may have heard of the term whistleblowing, and that's a term that comes up very often when we're discussing ethics. Whistleblowing just means that if you discover something unethical is happening in the business, you tell somebody else about it so that appropriate steps can be taken. Of course, Di Vulge is one of the office employees, so of course she probably doesn't want to lose her job. And if she finds out that her boss is doing something dishonest, it's quite possible that he might not give her a bonus, he might punish her in some way, he might even go so far as to give her a written warning. But if you want to be ethical, you should make sure that you give information if you know that something dishonest or something immoral is happening. So I would say that the best advice that one could give Di is that she should speak to the other partner and tell her what is happening and let her make the decision as to what should be done. Let's look at the next question. The next question asks how and why the fixed assets register can assist an internal auditor in his or her duties. A fixed assets register, you should also remember from grade 11, is just a register or a book that keeps track of your fixed assets. So it will include information such as the cost price of the asset, the accumulated depreciation of the asset, the date that it was bought, the serial number or the license number, and various other pieces of information like that. Now the question is asking us, how will the fixed assets register assist the internal auditor in his duties? Well, a very important thing for the internal auditor to do is to check the existence of the fixed assets. So, at the end of the financial year, the internal auditor will go through the business and try and identify any problem areas. And what he or she should do is to check what the value of the fixed assets is. If there is an asset register, he can identify the fixed assets and he can determine whether they physically exist. So if the business says that it's got 5 different vehicles, the auditor can actually check that. If he knows how many assets there are supposed to be, he will get that information from the fixed assets register. A second important thing is that the internal auditor would be able to see the lifespan of the fixed assets. In other words, the accumulated depreciation. This will be very, very important for drawing up the balance sheet, and it will also be very important when it comes to valuing the assets if you want to sell them. So it wouldn't be any use to us if we didn't know what our vehicle was worth on the day that we are intending to sell it. And a fixed assets register will keep track of that so that we are at any time of the year able to know how much a vehicle is worth, how much a piece of equipment is worth, when we bought it, from whom we bought it, and how much use it's been to us. So as a result, the internal auditor will be able to use the fixed assets register as a very important control mechanism for the business. So you would have to, when answering a question like this, for 3 marks, you would have to construct a well-reasoned answer explaining these points, obviously in longer sentence format than the couple of points that I've just put down here. But I think that you would get the idea. The next question says that in order to solve their cash flow problems, Mike has sold a portion of the premises at cost price. So the business has got cash flow problems, and what Mike has done is he has sold a portion of the premises. In other words, he sold some land or he sold a building or something like that, and he has sold it at cost price. Millie disagrees with him on this. The question is whether you support Millie's opinion or not, and you have to give a reason. Let's look back at the information that we've been given. Remember, you would find the information on fixed assets usually in the fixed assets note. So what we're interested in here is the sale of the building. Can you see here that if we look at the fixed assets note, our land and buildings have been sold during the financial year. So a piece of land has been sold at 700,000 Rand. That's the information that we're after. So Mike has sold a piece of land for 700,000 Rand, and it says here that that is the cost price of the land. Millie says that he should not have done that, and you need to give a reason whether or not you support Millie's opinion. Well, I think that a possible reason would be, we could say that he should not have sold this building or these premises at cost price, because land and buildings are scarce resources that constantly go up in value. Remember, we said at the beginning that land and buildings usually appreciate. So if he is selling these buildings at cost price, he is perhaps missing out on the opportunity of making a profit. So one possible answer that we could have said is, yes, we support Millie's opinion. Mike could have made a profit. On the sale. A second possibility is that land and buildings are very scarce resources, and having a piece of land is always a good thing to have because you can use it for different reasons in the business. So instead of renting premises, if you have your own premises, that's usually an advantage. So Millie could also have said, yes, she disagrees because this will negatively impact the business in the future. Of course, you could also say that you do not support Millie's opinion, and you'd also have to give a reason for that. Perhaps this business is indeed in trouble, and it urgently needs to sell something in order to maintain a good cash flow. Why should it sell its land and buildings? Well, we don't know what that piece of land is being used for. Perhaps that piece of land is standing empty. Perhaps that piece of land is in a very bad location, or perhaps that piece of land is a really dilapidated building that would cost a large amount of money to repair. So because the question hasn't given us enough information about the land, we could perhaps say something like that. We could say, for example, no, if the property is not being utilized, it could be sold, and then that cash that you receive could be used to do something else. Maybe the business is in urgent need of a new machine that would be able to bring in massive amounts of profits in the future. Maybe the business is in urgent need of a new delivery vehicle. We don't exactly know, but we could disagree with Millie, and we could say that Mike is correct to sell this piece of property if we give some additional information such as that. We could say that the property is underutilized, or perhaps the property is in an area that is not very popular at the moment. We could rather sell it and then use that money perhaps to buy something that would be of greater benefit or of greater value to the business. It's quite an open-ended question, and you could argue yes or no, but your answer is not as important as the reasons you give for justifying why you agree or why you disagree. So remember that when you answer open-ended questions like this. Okay, so the next question deals with delivery vehicles. It says that the business owns 3 delivery vehicles, and it says that there's information in respect of each delivery vehicle in the fixed asset register, which is information point number 4 in our question. First part is that we should identify the cost price of delivery vehicle 3, and the second part of the question says that we should explain why delivery vehicle 2 is shown at a book value of R1. Well, let's look at the information that we've been given. Here's information part 4. This is an example of the fixed assets register. Can you see we've been given 3 different delivery vehicles, and there's a whole lot of information about them. And the first question that we've been asked is to identify the cost price of delivery vehicle number 3. So we're looking for the cost price of this vehicle. Can you see, if you look at the question has a question mark here where the cost price of vehicle 3 should be. This is very, very easy if you know your formula. It's the same formula that we used previously. Remember, in depreciation, a very important formula is this one. The carrying value is equal to the cost price minus the accumulated depreciation. I'm just abbreviating it to save some time. So, in this example, can you see we've been given the carrying value at 72,000, and we've been given the accumulated depreciation, it's 168,000. Now, if you know that formula, it becomes very easy. Let's transfer that information in here. So in this case, the 72,000 Rand, which you'll remember is our carrying value over here, is equal to the cost price which we want to solve minus the accumulated depreciation of 168,000 Rand. The 168,000 I've taken directly from here. So that makes it very easy to calculate the cost price. We just have to solve this equation. All we will do is we'll take the 168,000 over, and that will mean that the cost price is equal to 168,000 plus 72,000. Can you see what I've done? I've just transferred this 168,000 to the other side, but I've just swapped it around so that I have the cost price on the left-hand side. That should be an easy calculation. We'll just put it into the calculator to check it. So the calculation is 168,000 plus 72,000, and that gives us an answer of 240,000. So for 3 marks, we've calculated the cost price of the vehicle as 240,000 Rand. The second question is somewhat different. It says that we have to explain why delivery vehicle number 2 is shown at a book value of R1. Let's have a look what they mean by that. Here it is. It says there that delivery vehicle 2 costs only R1 in our books. Why does that happen? Well, it's quite easy. Can you see that the cost price was 144,000, and up to the end of the financial year, it's depreciated by 143,999. What this means is that this vehicle is fully depreciated. We would have depreciated it every year, and we would be doing it on the fixed installment method. so that after a certain number of years, it is completely depreciated and its value should be 0. However, if we are still using the vehicle, then we cannot show its value as nothing in the books. We have to show the value as at least R1, because all assets in our books must have at least R1, and the vehicle will continue to be shown at a price of R1 until such time as we dispose of it completely. So a good answer would be, for this question, it's the second part, Vehicle 2 has been fully depreciated but is still in use. Remember, if it wasn't in use anymore, we would not include it in the fixed assets register, and we would make an entry in our asset disposal account to get rid of it if we're no longer using it. So, it cannot be shown to have 0 value in the books. And must be at least R1. Always remember that, because that's something that comes up quite often. This can only happen on the cost method, on the fixed installment method. It can never happen on the carrying value method that the vehicle will be worth only R1. The reason for this is that when you're using the fixed installment method, you depreciate by the same amount every year until after a certain number of years you've fully depreciated the vehicle. With the diminishing balance method, on the other hand, your vehicles depreciate at a smaller amount every year because you are working out your depreciation on a smaller carrying value each time, and as such they can never reach 0. But just always please bear in mind when you're answering questions, especially in your final exam, that when a vehicle is fully depreciated and when it's still in use, it should be shown as R1 in the books, since it cannot have 0 value in the books if you are still using it. Now this question asks us to look at some control of vehicles. It says that there's a business that's delivering goods within Bloemfontein. They charge a flat rate of R250 per delivery. Clients pay cash directly to the drivers, and a total of 3,680 deliveries were done during the year. The delivery service operated on 260 days during the year, and now, in this question, you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the internal auditor. You're supposed to try and determine what problems there are relating to the delivery vehicles as well as their drivers. The question asks you to refer to the information in point 4, and you are to identify and explain one major problem relating to each vehicle or to its driver. So there's something that could be improved on in each of these cases. The question also asks you to quote figures from the information to support your answer, and then provide valid solutions to the problems. So let's take a look at the information that's been given. Here is the information on the various drivers. You can see there that there are 3 drivers, Solly, Temba and Goldie. Solly has worked 210 days, Temba 260, Goldie 260. And you can see their deliveries on the next line, as well as the cash that's been paid in by the drivers, the salary that's been paid to the drivers, the fuel and maintenance costs for the year, and the fuel and maintenance costs per kilometre. What you need to do is identify at least one problem relating to each vehicle. Can you think of what these problems are? Take a look at the information, and we'll discuss it again after the break. Welcome back. During the break, I asked you to look at the information from the accounting records relating to the 3 drivers in this business. And I asked you to see if you could find any problems. Let's look back at the question. You'll see there that we are actually required to do different things. First of all, we are supposed to identify one problem relating to each delivery vehicle. In other words, we have to do 3 separate problems. Secondly, we are supposed to support our answer with figures. So we're going to have to take some number or some figure from the answer in order to justify or to motivate the answer that we've given. And thirdly, we are supposed to provide a valid solution to each problem. So let's look at the three vehicles in turn. First of all, we can consider delivery vehicle 1. Here's delivery vehicle 1. Can you see that Solly has worked only 210 days this year compared to the 260 days of Temba and to the 260 days of Goldie? In other words, he has worked 50 days less than the other drivers. Perhaps he has been sick, perhaps he's been absent from work, but in either event, we would have to try to determine why that is happening. So that would be one possible answer. We could say driver has worked 50 fewer days than the other drivers. So that would be one cause for concern. Let's look at another point. Can you see that delivery vehicle 1 has done only 280 deliveries, as opposed to 2,100 deliveries from driver 2 and 1,300 deliveries from driver 3. He's done almost, for 210 days worked, he's done only 280 deliveries. That's not even 2 deliveries per day. So we would need to investigate, why is the driver producing so few deliveries? So we can say, as a second possible point, that the vehicle has delivered much less than the other 2 vehicles. So that's the second possible problem. Also, can you see that the cash paid in by the driver is only 70,000 Rand? Yet, the salary that's paid to this driver is 52,000 Rand, and the fuel and maintenance costs are 36,000 Rand. Let's take a look at this information in more detail on the calculator. The vehicle has earned 70,000 Rand, but it's paid out a salary of 52,000 Rand to the driver, and it has paid out fuel and maintenance costs of 36,400 Rand. Can you see that that vehicle is making a loss of 18,400 Rand? That's the third possible point. This vehicle is running at a loss. And because the question says that you should quote figures, you'll notice I've quoted the 50 here for the 50 fewer days. So I should also quote that this vehicle has made a loss of 18,400 Rand. Those are 3 possible difficulties with this vehicle. Also, if you look at the fuel and maintenance costs per kilometre, can you see that this vehicle's maintenance costs are 1 Rand 30, which is much lower than the 2 Rand and 5 cents and the 1 Rand 55 cents of the other 2 vehicles. Yet, this vehicle, which is probably the vehicle that is the most fuel efficient and has the lowest maintenance cost per kilometre, has been used to make the fewest possible deliveries. In other words, it's done 280 deliveries instead of 2,100 and 1,300 deliveries. So that could be another possible point, that the vehicle with the best maintenance or the lowest maintenance costs per kilometre is being underutilized. Now, you'll know that the question only asked us to identify one problem. Remember, the question only asked you to identify one major problem. So in a test or in an exam, you should not write all 4 of these points. I'm only writing them down here so that you see that there are many possible answers to this question. Please just, when you are doing a test or an exam, please make sure that you answer the question properly, because if you answer all 4 of these points in the question, you will actually not only waste time, but you could lose marks as well for not meeting the criteria of the question. But I'm just showing you the 4 possibilities so that you have an idea of what you could possibly answer. Okay, so what we've done so far is the first part of the question. For the first vehicle, we've identified the major problem, quoting figures in support. What would a valid solution to the problem be? Well, here once again, you need to use your own ideas on how we could solve the problem. First of all, one thing that we could do is we should not pay drivers a salary because you can see that all 3 drivers are earning the same salary of 52,000 Rand per month, whereas Solly is working only 210 days and doing 280 deliveries, whereas Temba and Goldie have earned the same salary, but they've been working much harder. But of course, you can't just not pay the drivers a salary at all. You should rather perhaps pay them per delivery. So the more deliveries you do, the more money you are likely to earn. In that way, it will encourage Solly to work as hard as the other drivers. And that would be a valid solution to the problem. The first problem we've identified, that he has worked 50 fewer days than the other drivers, as well as the second problem, which is that he has delivered so much less than the other 2 vehicles. Another thing that we could do is, because this vehicle has got the lowest costs per kilometre, we should perhaps allocate this vehicle to a different driver. And which driver do you think we should allocate it to? Well, I would say we should allocate this vehicle, which is the cheapest, to Temba, because Temba is doing 2,100 deliveries, whereas Solly is only doing 280. Perhaps there is a valid reason for Solly only doing 280 deliveries, but if that's the case, then your cheapest vehicle should be allocated to your busiest driver, and it should work the hardest because it can save you a great deal of money. So we could say in this answer that we should allocate the vehicle to Temba, as he is the busiest driver. So any one problem, together with one solution, that should earn you the first 3 marks to the question. Now that we've done that, we should look at the second delivery vehicle. So we've dealt with the first delivery vehicle. Delivery vehicle 2. This is the vehicle that is working quite hard. You can see there from the information that's been given that Temba has been using this vehicle to do 2,100 deliveries. Much more than what Temba has done. We could actually work it out, and we could work out how many deliveries Temba is doing per day. Can you see that he has worked 260 days and he has done 2,100 deliveries? So if we say 2,100 divide by 260, we see that this vehicle is being used to do around 8 vehicles per day. It's a very busy delivery vehicle. But you can see that this vehicle is also the most expensive one in terms of kilometres, because this vehicle costs 2.05 Rand in fuel and maintenance cost, whereas the other 2 vehicles are much cheaper. So that would be one possibility. Let us write it in words. The problem would be the vehicle that costs the most in deliveries or that costs the most per kilometre is used for the most deliveries. And because we are asked to quote a figure, we could put in brackets that it's 8 per day. We could also perhaps say that there's a problem in that Temba is working harder than the other drivers. He's working much harder than the other drivers because he is doing 2,100 deliveries, whereas the next hardworking driver, or next most hardworking driver, is Goldie, who is doing 1,300 deliveries. So possibilities would be, once again, to solve this problem, we should possibly, the solutions would be allocate this vehicle to Solly perhaps, because Solly is the least busy driver at the moment. Or perhaps what we should do is we should pay Temba a performance bonus as this will perhaps encourage some of the other drivers to work as hard as he is working. Now let's look at the third delivery vehicle. Delivery vehicle 3. This vehicle is roundabout in the middle because the driver is working the same number of days as Temba, but he's doing 1,300 deliveries instead of 2,100 deliveries. So he's roughly in the middle. He's paid in cash of 275,000, his salary is 52,000, and the fuel and maintenance costs are relatively low compared to those of delivery vehicle number 2. What's important to realize though, please take a look at the revenue that Goldie is bringing in. Temba is bringing in revenue of 525,000 Rand. That is the cash that he is paying into the business every month. Delivery vehicle 3 though, Goldie, is paying in only 275,000 Rand. This could be a cause for concern, and the reason I say that is that if you remember what the information was given to us in the question, it says that the business charges a flat rate of 250 Rand, here it is, per delivery, and clients pay cash directly to the drivers. Now let's see what should have been earned by this third delivery vehicle. You will see that Goldie used her vehicle to make 1,300 deliveries. So the amount of income that she should have earned is 1,300 times by 250 Rand. Okay, so let's look at it on the calculator. This driver did 1,300 deliveries at 250 Rand per delivery. This came to 325,000 Rand. Let's write that down here. So Goldie should have brought in for us 325,000 Rand. However, if you look at the information, the cash that she paid in was only 275,000 Rand. Here is a problem. Because the driver was supposed to have paid in 325,000 and she paid in only 275,000, she could be committing fraud or she could be stealing money from the business in some way. So let's write that out in good answer form. The amount that she should have earned was 325,000 Rand. But the driver paid in only 275,000 Rand, which is 325,000 minus 275,000. That comes to, let's do it on the calculator, minus 275,000. That comes to 50,000 Rand less than what she should have paid in. Once again, we are justifying our answer with the quoting of relevant figures. Remember, you should always read the question carefully and make sure that if the question tells you to quote or if it tells you to use a financial indicator, you actually do that. So she paid in 50,000 Rand less than she should have. This is obviously going to be a problem for the business because some money has gone missing. So obviously this driver is taking some money from the business in some way. Remember, the question says that the drivers are paid in cash. The customers pay cash directly to the drivers. So that means that when the driver makes the delivery, the customer pays that money in cash, and that makes it quite easy for the driver to pocket some of the money himself or herself. How could we fix that? Well, we'd need to apply some type of internal control mechanism. So a possible solution here would be something like don't allow clients to pay drivers directly. So there could be perhaps other ways. Perhaps you could set up an internet banking account where the clients pay the money into the banking account in order to ensure delivery, or you could find some other reason, because 50,000 Rand is a huge amount of money to lose every single time, and if it's especially concerning if your employee is being dishonest and fraudulently keeping the money. Another possible way would be that you could conduct an audit of the fees collected. So you could take some or other steps to try to identify where and why the driver is losing the money, or where the money has gone. And if it's been proven that the driver, or been suspected that the driver has been acting unethically, one could also conduct a disciplinary hearing against the driver. So very important that you treat your employees ethically as well. Very often in questions like this, people would just say, fire the driver. Don't say that in a question in an exam, because it's much more complicated than that. You can't just simply go firing people left, right, and center. There are proper disciplinary procedures that have to be involved. There have to be written warnings. There's a lot of paperwork. So you can't just simply fire somebody just because you suspect them of being fraudulent. Make sure that you don't answer that as an answer, but rather say that you should conduct a disciplinary hearing or conduct a full investigation into the causes and into the reasons of why the money has gone missing. If you answer like that, you should get 9 marks for this question. And that's the end of question 1. Okay, let's look at the second question. The second question is much the same as the first question in that it also has an asset disposal account. In this question, we're dealing with a business called Manic Limited for the year ended 30th of June 2010. And it asks us in 2.1 to refer to the note for fixed assets, which is information point D, as well as the note on the cash flow statement, information point C, in order to prepare the asset disposal account in the general ledger. So once again, we're going to follow those 5 steps that you should by now know very, very well. Let's have a look at the information that we've been given. They've asked us to look at information point D, so we can skip A and B and C for now. So information point D is the note on fixed assets, and we are going to deal with a disposal. Firstly, we can see that we've been given the date of the disposal. Remember, you're going to look at this point here, which deals with the disposals of fixed assets. This was on the 1st of March 2010 is the day on which this equipment was disposed of. And we can see there that we have a disposal of 370,000 Rand. This business does not have any vehicles, it only has land and buildings and equipment. So we know that on the 1st of March 2010, we disposed of equipment to the value of 370,000, and we know that this was the carrying value because we know that disposals are always given at carrying value. Now, let's see what other information we've been given, because the question asked us to refer to information point D as well as information point C. Information point C is the cash flow statement for the year. Because we're dealing with fixed assets, we should refer to this area of the cash flow statement, which is the cash effects of investing activities. In a separate module, you would have learned how to prepare this note, but here we have to use the already completed note in order to draw up the financial statements, well, in other words, to draw up the general ledger. So you can see there that we have purchased fixed assets, and here's the value, and we have also sold fixed assets, 370,000, for cash. So that's important. We have sold this vehicle for cash. So we know that the entry on the credit side of this account is going to be bank. Let's have a look now at the asset disposal account. Here it says General Ledger of Manic Limited Asset Disposal Account. I usually advise my learners to start off by filling in all the information that they know. So we know that we disposed of some equipment because we didn't have any vehicles. So we know that we disposed of some equipment as a carrying value of 370,000. So I usually would advise learners to start off by filling in the information that we know, and you should be able to see that on the debit side of this account, I'm going to include equipment here because it's equipment that has been sold. On the credit side, you will obviously need to put accumulated depreciation on equipment, and once again, that's where you have to fit it in quite small. But remember, abbreviations are not permitted. So write as small as you can, but make sure you get all of the words in. There we go, accumulated depreciation on equipment. You'll remember that we also have on the credit side of this account the selling price. And we know that this vehicle was sold for cash. How do we know that? Because in the cash flow statement, it tells us that fixed assets were sold for cash. So we can very easily, on this side, include the word bank. Now we also have a folio column in this question. And the folio column is important because you usually will include GJ as the folio, except when you're including the cost price, the selling price of the asset. We are selling this vehicle or this piece of equipment for cash. So where it says bank, we would have to write CRJ because entries that affect bank are made in the CRJ or in the CPJ. In this case, we have sold an asset for cash, so it will be included in the CRJ as we are now receiving some cash. Now that we've got this ledger account filled in, we need to remember the last point in our asset disposal. We would put in a profit on the sale of asset or a loss on the sale of asset. But because in our cash flow statement, the question tells us that we sold the fixed asset for cash of 370,000, and because our fixed asset note tells us that the carrying value of the vehicle, of the equipment, was 370,000, you should be able to see that we have sold something for 370,000 at its carrying value. So we sold something costing 370,000 or something valued at 370,000 and received cash for it of 370,000. There it is. So what that means is that we have not made a profit or a loss on this piece of equipment because we've sold it at exactly the same price as what it was valued for. So that means that we are not going to have any entry in our asset disposal account that says profit on sale of asset or loss on sale of asset. And our answer sheet prepares us for that because there's no space to write that on the credit side. There is a line free on the debit side, but we're not going to use that, as you will see. So, because we received 370,000 Rand cash for this equipment, we should be able to write 370,000 here next to bank, because that is the cash that we received for this piece of equipment, as you can see in the question over here. We sold it for cash of 370,000, so that is the amount of money that we got for this piece of equipment. Now, nowhere did it give us a cost price or any other information on this equipment that we've sold. All we have is the information that's given to us here in the fixed asset note. Now, what's important to realize is that when you're looking at the fixed asset note, the cost price at the beginning of the year and the cost price at the end of the year have changed. You can see it went up from 280,000 to 3066, 2.8 million to 3.066 million. So what we need to do now is we need to calculate what we've added and what the cost price was of the equipment that we've sold. So this is very similar to what you've learned in another module with the cash flow statement. When you're calculating assets that have been purchased or assets that have been sold, what you should know is that there's a formula to do this. We start with the cost price at the beginning of the year. So the cost price at the beginning of the year was this 2,800,000. Let's write it in. 2,800,000. And we know that the cost price at the end of the year was 3.066 million. Now to that, we add our additions, and our additions were given to us at 758,000. Remember that additions always take place at the cost price. So that was 758,000 Rand. Our disposals are given to us at 370,000 Rand. But it's very important not to get confused, and you must remember that disposals are always given at carrying value. They are never given at the cost price. So that's why in your cash flow statement, if you want to work out the carrying value or the depreciation or the additions of various assets, what you would do is you'd start with the carrying value at the beginning of the year, add your additions, subtract your disposals, subtract your depreciation, and that would give you the carrying value at the end of the year. We can do exactly the same with the cost price, but we must remember that the cost price will require our disposals to be given to us at cost price as well. And that's what we want to work out. So I'm going to include on this next line minus disposals at cost price. Notice that's different to disposals at carrying value in our cash flow statement. But I'm not interested in that right now. I'm interested in knowing what the cost price was of the piece of equipment that I have sold. So I'll put that in as X, and that equals your 3,066,000. What I can do now is I can set up an equation. Our cost price at the beginning of the year, the 2.8 million, plus the additions at cost of 758,000, minus the disposal of the equipment that I'm trying to work out, which I'm referring to as X, is equal to 3,066,000. Now all we do is we solve for X. So let's take the X over to that side and the 3.066 million over to this side. So what we have now is 2,800,000 plus 758,000 minus 3,066,000, and that's going to equal my X. Just remember what we're working out. We're working out the cost price of our disposal. Let's do it on the calculator. We want to know what our X is. So it's 2.8 million. Always make sure that you count the number of zeros correctly. Add to that your 758,000. Subtract from that 3,066,000, and that gives us an addition of 492,000 Rand. So the answer here is going to be 492,000 Rand. That is the cost price of the asset that we have sold. If we go back to our ledger account, we'll be able to do that now. The cost price of the equipment that we have sold is 492,000 Rand. Now, remember we said by looking at the cash flow statement, you'll remember that we said we haven't made a profit or a loss on the sale of this equipment because it was sold for cash. There we have it. It was sold for cash at the carrying value. Here is the carrying value of the equipment at 370,000, and we sold it at the carrying value and received 370,000, so we have made neither a profit nor a loss on the sale of this particular piece of equipment. So we will know that there's no profit or loss in this ledger account, and it becomes very easy just to balance the ledger and calculate our accumulated depreciation on equipment. So we identify again the bigger side. That's this side here of 492,000. Let's write the total in on both sides. And now the accumulated depreciation on equipment will be very easy to calculate. We just take this left-hand side of 492,000 and we subtract the bank amount of 370,000, and we will see that we have accumulated depreciation of 122,000 Rand. If we fill it in here, then our question is done and we've earned ourselves those 9 marks. That's all for now. See you again. Thank you and goodbye.